The following podcast was produced by Big Head Amusements for KQEK.com. After apprenticing under John Frizzell, Frederik Wiedmann has maintained multiple careers as an orchestrator, mixer, and composer of several graphic horror films, including Return to House on Haunted Hill, The Hills Run Red, and Mirrors 2. But with The Green Lantern, the animated series, he's finally been given an opportunity to show off his skills by writing a multi-thematic, almost classic orchestral score, with organically blended electronics and sound samples. How about we just start with the Green Lantern, because I guess that must be a unique change of pace for you, because you've scored quite a few dramas and a number of horror films over the last few years.
Yeah, it was a big shift for me in direction, because it was the first time I've ever dealt with anything close to superheroes or animation for that matter, which was also something that the producers pointed out to me when I met for my interview. They were like, yeah, well, you haven't really done anything like this. How do we know that you can do this and turn it around every week and so forth? So it was definitely something that I had to prove myself on, just because of the lack of my experience in that field. But it didn't take very long for them to realize that I'm capable of doing it. And yeah, it was a bit of a learning curve. You know, I did my homework. I did a lot of studying. I watched a lot of animation, especially recent ones, mostly the theatrical features, you know, John Powell scores and those type of things. And then I just really sat down and analyzed, how is it different from live action, and how do they treat certain moments and so forth. And I think I learned a lot by doing that. And then I had to dive into Green Lantern pretty soon after I got the gig. And so that really wasn't that much time for me to practice, so to speak. But it kind of felt rather natural from the very beginning. I'd say from episode 1, I felt very comfortable with the genre and the type of pace that I have to establish for a 22-minute episode. So it was a pretty easy transition, I'd say. Certainly, having done a lot of feature films before was great to have under my belt, just to know technically and also speed-wise how to create a score at the best possible quality.
Well, I noticed that with a lot of Warner's animation films for the DC line, they really seem to favor a lot of large orchestral scores, and as well just orchestral with a lot of fusion elements, whether it's from electronics or from even some ethnic instruments. And I wondered, did they give you any kind of direction, or were you given pretty much a lot of freedom to choose the kind of sound for the TV series?
Bruce Timm and Giancarlo Volpe, the two main producers that I creatively dealt with the most, they wanted it to be orchestral. They said that right from the bat. There was no big search for the sound of the show. They said they wanted to be big, adventurous, sci-fi, superhero. They did say a few specific things, such as they didn't want it to feel too contemporary, too modern. Like, it could have moments of slight retro feel, which, quite honestly, I feel like we've abandoned pretty quickly, because we felt like what I was doing was working a little better than what we tried to make it a little retro. So I think that idea kind of died along the way of the first episode. But other than that, they said they don't want it to be like John Williams. That was one very specific thing. They don't want any John Williams-esque superhero music in there at all. And then they said they wanted something new and interesting for the aliens in space, because it's such a broad universe that we're dealing with, all these different planets and aliens and threats, and so to speak. So they really wanted to try also, besides the normal orchestral palette, to add other things in there, which, just like you mentioned just now, ethnic instruments. We've used the duduk, which is an Armenian wind instrument. I used Middle Eastern guitars for the goblins. I think it was episode 17 or 18. The Star Sapphires have these haunting, slightly ethnic, but kind of ethereal and seductive female vocals. And then the instrument for Razor, our most complex character, he has an electric 5-string violin. That's a very unique instrument with a lot of emotional depth, which I thought was very perfectly alien sounding, as well as has enough emotional content. So yeah, that was kind of the discussion we had in the beginning, and then we just kind of went for it, and it seemed to blend in pretty nicely together.
Well, you mentioned the electric violin, and I guess I don't know if it's the same instrument that I'm thinking of, but several years ago there was a TV series called, I think it was Night Caller, and essentially it was about a radio DJ, and Brad Fiedel was the one that scored the
most of the episodes as well as the main theme, and he used an electric violin, and I always wondered if it's the same instrument.
It possibly is. There's a lot of electric violins out there. The one I'm using is almost like an electric viola because it's got this extra fifth string on the bottom. So it gives you an additional area in the low range, which is the one I've been using the most because it's very rich and kind of somber. I haven't really used it much way up high. It's really just kind of in the low register. So I think a lot of people use the 4-string violin, but I intentionally found a person that has a 5-string just to get that additional low note.
And I wondered, how did the timetable and the demands of scoring an animated series differ from doing a feature film?
Well, that's a thing to get used to, honestly, as a composer, because on a feature you start with the spotting session and then 6 to 8 weeks later you're done and you move on to the next project. And in TV it just keeps going for over a year. In Green Lantern's case, it was a year and a half of just constant delivery, every 2 weeks spitting out another episode. So you really have to have a lot of discipline and endurance to keep up the quality, to not let yourself burn out. Because there's small differences in the episodes, of course, but the overall vibe is pretty much staying the same just because it's the sound of the show. So you really have to work hard at yourself to not get tired of it and really keep putting out your best every single time. And that requires a lot of discipline and hard mental work, so to speak.
I'm often stunned by the quality of writing with these animated films, and for the TV series in particular, there's such dense writing and such nice fine details in there. And I guess what I thought was kind of interesting is that a lot of money was spent for the new Superman film, and yet I really wasn't that impressed with the music that was written for the film. There was a lot of hype made about it because Hans Zimmer scored it, and there was a lot of effort made with getting all these percussionists and the writing that he tried to come up with something different. But I think that there's a lot more variety, and I'd even say more quality that resides in the animated films and TV series.
Wow, that's very nice to hear, of course, for us TV composers, because obviously we're budget-wise a lot more restricted than Hans Zimmer was on Man of Steel, of course. I honestly like the score to Man of Steel quite a bit. It's a tough movie to score because Superman is such a optimistic character, and just recently it hasn't proven to be that successful with audiences. So I think they really had to figure out a way to make him more approachable for today's audience. And I thought the music did a fair job to really give it a new vibe. I wasn't sure, people keep saying, well, Superman can only work with the John Williams theme, but I completely disagree with that because it's just, I feel like the characters are evolving for us as an audience as we are evolving, and they have to be slightly adjusted to that. And as great as I find John Williams' music for Superman, and all his other scores for that matter, but it's just if you reinvent the character, I don't think the same old theme from many, many years ago will work. So I think Hans did a good job to just give it a new, varied, contemporary, and slightly ethereal voice, so to speak. And as for us TV composers, we have obviously a lot less in the budget to spend, which is why my Green Lantern score is 95% out of the computer. If you may have noticed, there's maybe 4 to 5 live performers on each episode, but that's about it. Everything else is done inside my studio on my keyboard. Obviously requires a lot of scrutiny and programming to get it to sound realistic and to make it sound great. But yeah, I've always tried to treat each little episode like a big feature film. Everything has a nice build up and a crescendo to the end scene, and it's all kind of very big and epic sounding. And I thought that was kind of a fun thing to do, and it really seemed to pay off for the audience. It's fun based on the feedback we've been getting.
For yourself, what were some of your favorite moments in the animated series? Because from a listener standpoint, I really enjoyed the detailed writing, the rhythms that you have, and some of the great percussion stuff, especially with the ethnic percussion that you used in a number of cues.
Yeah, well, that's a tough question. I have to think back. I did 26 episodes, and I think my favorite moments were in the back 13 episodes, the Razor Aya relationship. You know, that artificial intelligence robot that starting to have feelings for the Red Lantern that's on the Green Lantern side. I think that was the most complex part of the big story arc that I had to deal with, because it was such a forbidden love. Because first of all, he used to be the biggest enemy of the Green Lanterns, and second of all, she is an artificial intelligence. She's a robot, but somehow they can't quite fight their feelings. So it's a very interesting story arc, and I think the way they structured it is really awesome. But all the devastation that they're creating with Aya, I don't know if I can spoil the TV show here since it's aired. I suppose I can, but there's several moments when Aya is dying or being destroyed, and I think that's really those moments are really the fun ones to score, because you can really go build up to that thematically as well as with the size of the group. So that was really a lot of fun.
And then my next to last question is, because there were 26 episodes that you had to score, was it difficult to distill the music down for a soundtrack album? Because I'm kind of interested in the process that's involved where, when they say we're going to make a soundtrack album, what from your end as a composer do you have to do in order to synthesize the whole thing down for a listening experience?
Oh, that was hard. The thing about the TV series of that scope is that every cue, and I don't know how other people work, if they do it the same, but at least for me, I literally compose every single piece from scratch for every episode. I don't do any tracking of old cues. Just because in animation, things change so quickly. You may have a close-up of a face for 3 seconds and then you move on back into the action sequence. Versus in a feature live action film, you may get 30 seconds on that close-up. So you have more time to do something. In other words, using an old cue to fit into a new scene is almost impossible just because it changes so frequently. So I really had to compose everything from scratch, which makes the decision even harder to figure out what to put on the soundtrack, because I'm kind of in love with every single piece that I've written for every scene. So it took a while for me to listen down and really find the best variations of everything without being repetitive, without being too similar, not too much action, not too much emotional stuff. Just kind of keep a nice balance so that the whole album feels like a nice listening experience, so you don't feel very exhausted afterwards because it was too actiony, or bored because it's too emotional and that. So I really just went through and found the best variation of everything, plus also the most thematic cues, because I feel like people like to listen to themes more than just kind of pulses and those type of things.
And then my last question essentially is just, I guess, more of a comment. The fact that for those familiar with your horror scores are more accustomed to kind of the avant-garde writing and the fusion and sampling and blending and effects-driven stuff that you've done, where sort of unique sounds are crafted in the digital domain. But I think they'll find that with Green Lantern, it shows off basically your ability to write some really lovely themes, and how you can also alter those themes in different kind of emotional moods, which is quite different from the more abstract nature of the horror work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was, and that's really that's the biggest difference between doing horror movies and doing superhero stuff, because it just thrives on thematic material. More than anything. And that's really, to me, it's so much more successful when you have thematic material to work with in a story, because just developing that alone is brings out such a big story point. So it's a really great treat to be able to do that and have people like themes and want more themes. Like Bruce Timm and Giancarlo both, they were very much in love with all the thematic material that I created, and they, constantly asked for more and wanted me to go further. And a lot of times these days when I get movies, not just horror movies, even other ones, people are very allergic to anything that is too melodic. They immediately feel it's too old-fashioned or too over the top. And it's sort of an increasing trend to go down that road. Not just in horror films, like really a lot of other things that I've done. It's becoming less and less hip, so to speak, to use thematic material in a score. It's become very minimalistic. And I find that not necessarily the best development, but in Green Lantern's case, I was very glad that I was able to go full-on thematic.
The music to the Green Lantern, the animated series, is available in 2 separate volumes from La La Land Records. For related film and film music reviews, please visit KQEK.com. This program is copyright 2013 by Mark R. Hassan.